fig, peepal, or bow, trees that have stood across times with divine symbology, the ecological significance, and natural healing and nutritional powers. It is a symbol of wisdom, insight, creativity, longevity, and natural collaboration. I'd like to introduce Anshul Dar, who's the CEO and partner of that fig tree.
That fig tree, yes, it's Buddha got his enlightenment below a fig tree. It's known as ficus, essentially. It has got more than 1,000 varieties. We wanted to name the company The Fig Tree, but The Fig Tree was taken. So actually, we then named it as That Fig Tree. And then it kind of made sense, because we were referring to a specific type of the fig tree, So yeah, so as destiny chooses, things kind of fall in place. So thanks to Rachel, she kind of started on the note of, I don't know if you have heard of this whole, for a long time, market research was actually kind of ruled by or defined by a framework which was based on emotional unconscious. Have you heard of emotional unconscious? You may have heard of need, scope, and sensorium, though, isn't it? That's essentially emotional unconscious. So deciding on human involvement and engagement with decision making based on the emotions they feel. Then came the behavioral unconscious, which is when Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky came in, and they actually talked about the fact that people are not unrational, they are actually irrational, isn't it? So you act before you think, isn't it? And all of us get married, so you kind of get the idea. So basically, and then came this whole idea about the cultural unconscious, which is what we will talk about today. The fact that, in fact, the whole idea of emotions also is being rethought, wherein they are actually saying, and I don't want to debate with Rachel on that one because I don't know her model, how exactly it works, but essentially they have gone on to prove that physiological response just proves only the presence of emotion. It doesn't prove what emotion you will feel. Okay, emotions lie in the context. It's called as constructive theory of emotions. It's essentially a new theory, which is being propagated, and it's getting very, very popular. But anyways, so basically this is the company has been there for about now in the 7th year of running, and we have been doing culture-based human engagement drivers analysis for a very, very long time now, mostly in the space of qualitative research, not in the space of quantitative. We haven't yet come to validating it, but essentially what we did is that we actually back in a couple of years back, Google came to us, and I can talk about it because it's a published paper. Google came to us and said that they wanted to understand who is Gen Z. So what we did is that we looked at, and they gave us 200 papers already. That actually talk about who is Gen Z. And then they said that. Then they said they wanted to do some research to understand more. So imagine, after reading 200 papers, we had to do more research, to understand who is Gen Z. We looked at that, and then we said that, look, all these papers, what they are trying to do is essentially describe Gen Z, But no one is talking about why Gen Z is so different, or what makes Gen Z so different. Neuroscientifically speaking, the brain is exactly the same. There is nothing that has changed among the brains. And yet, most of us do not understand our kids who are 6 or 7 years old, isn't it? I was in India yesterday talking to some parents of kids who are 7 to 14 years old, and they said that they are absolutely clueless, but they are hopeful. That's exactly what the reaction was. So this is a reaction. So this girl we met in Thailand, she was 16 years old. She did a nose surgery. She already did an eyebrow surgery, and she did a chin surgery at 16 years of age already. And she talked about, we said, what are your aspirations, and this is exactly what she said, about her future, So essentially, these guys are, you can, a lot of arguments, go in the fact that, that look, all of us were like that, So when we were young, we all were Gen Z, So you can say that and you can ignore them, but I can tell you, when you are there talking to you to your children. My daughter, when she comes to me and she talks about something, she actually doesn't say one thing. She says three things. She says what she wants to say. Along with that, she says what I will feel like when she says that. And she also says why you will feel like that. So three things in one go. That's what she does. So essentially, generations are important. You can ignore them. You can say that, look, we all were the same. There is nothing different about it, etc., etc. But generations are very, and there is some huge change that is happening. We are talking about now Gen Alpha, which is actually in 2025, Gen Alpha is going to be 2 billion people, under the age of 10 years, okay, under the age of 12 years, okay, in the world. That's what we are talking about. So essentially, as you can already see, 2 out of 3 Gen Zs are actually in Asia. Together, 5 markets make up 30% of all global Gen Z. Just the Indonesia's Gen Z population has surpassed total population of USA, actually. So essentially, generations are important, and you cannot ignore them. I don't know if you have heard of these words, and there can be many, many more, that Gen Z actually talk about. There are so many meanings to them. Stan essentially means stalking fan, So that essentially means that you have, it's not bad. It's actually considered a good word, So if you are actually a fan of someone and you start stalking them, it's actually an expression that they use, So this is the generation that we are going to talk about. But I don't want you to get stuck in the Gen Z essentially. This just to give you the context of the piece. The idea is to make you understand why cultural unconscious matters. So when we looked at these 200 papers or maybe 300 papers, we actually found a lot of things are being said for Gen Z. We all know. They say screenagers. They say people who are woke. People who only worry about the planet. There are so many words. There are so many terminologies which are being associated with them. But why this difference? What is happening to this? Their brain hasn't changed. Their brain has exactly remained the same. Then why this huge difference, in terms of their attitude, their perceptions, their beliefs, the way the agency, they take on the agency, they believe they can change the world. We think we can change the world, but they believe they can change the world. That's the big difference, which is where culture again kind of eats the strategy. It's the context in which they have lived which has changed. They have lived, a lot of these people have done most of their schooling on Zoom. My son, after 4 years of schooling or 3 years of schooling, didn't know that there was actually schooling possible outside of Zoom. So because he did his 3 years of schooling during the COVID. So essentially, a lot has changed about them. And this. I don't know. Have you heard of the word meme? Do you know who coined the term meme? Have you heard of Richard Dawkins? Richard Dawkins is a biology evolutionist essentially, and he coined the term meme. Meme is essentially a parallel to gene. So genes are essentially the smallest unit of transferring biological traits to the generations ahead. Meme is essentially the smallest unit of transferring cultural traits to the generations ahead. That's what it means. Meme is not what you know as internet. Internet has actually appropriated that word from Richard Dawkins. And I was reading yesterday while I was researching this, that Richard Dawkins has actually done an interview with BBC where he actually talks about how internet has taken this word, and actually has made a somewhat similar meaning about it, But essentially, it was back in 80,000 years ago when people started, when people started to not just mimic, but started making small little improvements, and that's when culture evolved. Otherwise there would have been no culture, which is what they say that when ideas started having sex, that's when this came, and we are like dog breeders, culture breeds us, that's how we evolved. And pretty much like genes, I don't know if you know, but genes actually, body is considered as a survival vehicle for genes to move ahead, isn't it? Which is exactly the point with culture as well. Otherwise, if culture was absolutely good, then you won't find terrorism, suicide, drugs, homicide, etc., isn't it? So essentially, even culture survives for itself. Our body and our mind is just a tool to actually take it ahead. So let's just quickly go into these 2 case studies. I have 15 minutes, okay. So essentially, let's just quickly go into 2 of these case studies, and I will try and kind of establish to you the fact that why cultural analysis or cultural grounding of insights is important. So in Thailand, I don't know how many of you know, but essentially it's one of the biggest transgenders nation in the world. In fact, the second headquarter of LGBTQ actually is in Thailand. There is this documentary which is available online, which essentially talks about on why this whole trend actually picked up in Thailand. It's because they actually do not think of gender as identity. They think of gender only as a means to do things in life. And they all believe in this idea of what is called as bunkun, which is essentially an obligation towards mother, and later on it kind of translated to other M's. So in Thailand, there are 4 M's that operate: mother, monarchy, military, and monkhood. So if you can actually get into power position, you have to be in these 4 positions. Either you have to be a mother, or a monk, or a monarch, or a monarch, or a military. That's how they actually operated for a very, very long time. And which is why, out of the 66 known ways of a smile, only 6 actually convey happiness. Okay, but actually there are other 60 of them which do not convey happiness. But they still smile. So what do you do? What does a Thai do? When asked to express themselves, they just smile. But there are many smiles which actually do not convey happiness at all. That's essentially the way they have evolved. That's the cultural imprint of Thailand. But Gen Z, and this is an ad that will convey to you, I mean, it's a good expression of what.
จองนี้ครับ
โอเคเดี๋ยวจัดให้เลยขอบคุณมากสวัสดีครับครับผมโอเคมีเงินป่ะ
แม่เป็นไงบ้างอะ
แม่ไม่เป็นอะไรลูกแล้วหนูอะทำกันบ้านหรือยัง
ผู้หญิงคนหนึ่งทำได้ทุกอย่างยอมตัดผมเลิกใช้เครื่องสำอางทำในสิ่งที่ผู้หญิงแกร่งทำเราเชื่อในพลังผู้หญิง
So the whole, I don't know if you have got the chance to look at Thailand ads. They make it 5 to 6 minutes long. They are all available on YouTube. Insurance companies are most popular to actually make these dramatized versions of emotionally heartbreaking, sobbing, will make you sob kind of ads, But essentially all of them revolve around the fact that there is a very strong presence of emotions. But when you look at Gen Z, Gen Z took this whole idea of bunkun and they actually turned it around. They actually turned it around to something called as ittipon. Ittipon essentially means that the need to influence. So essentially, you remember the four M's that I talked about, the military, the monkhood, the monarchy, and the motherhood, There was only 4 M's to actually get to power. So when we were talking to an expert, he said there is a 5th M which has been designed, which will actually make you very powerful. It's called as Mercedes. So essentially, they actually found, Thailand Gen Z actually found that there is a way to actually get and show power, to people around without being these other 4 M's. And that is essentially the money. So they actually, a very, very overt display of money, overt display of status is what we are talking about, And which is where came this whole idea of seeking influence, the importance of money, the idea of enjoyment and amusement, and humor as a way to highlight individuality, And then there are outer expressions to that, essentially, But Thailand evolved. Gen Z have started taking this whole idea of passive acceptance and turning it around to what we call as active belonging. So to get accepted in college, promotions, at workplace, Thailand for a long time has remained the #1 market for Facebook, #1 market for Instagram, and #1 market for TikTok. There are, of course, now changes happening, but essentially the reason they do that is because to them, influence has got no embarrassment. Influence is actually associated to achieving more in life. In colleges, in promotions, at workplace, they love playing to templates, playing the Japanese template, playing the Korean template. They focus on here and now, and they are actually so very eager to looking for the next trend. If you want to see what does that influence mean, and how it can change things very, very fast, or how should it change things very, very fast for people, look at this ad.
อยากมีผิวหน้าที่ดีไหม ขั้นแรกไปตลาด ซื้อปลา แล้วไปที่ท่าน้ำ ขึ้นเรือ แล้วไปฝรั่งเศส
ฝรั่งเศส
แล้วหาประวัติให้เจอ เคลี้ยงปลาไป แล้วรอ ปลาหวานก็จะตอบแทนด้วย แพลงก์ตอนที่มีคุณสมบัติช่วยซ่อมแซมและยกกระชับผิวของคุณถึงผิวชั้นในให้คุณมีผิวหน้าที่ดีได้ หรือจะใช้ Ocean Skin Water Essence อยู่บ้านง่ายๆ เพราะมีสารสกัดจากแพลงก์ตอนใต้ท้องทะเลลึกของประเทศฝรั่งเศสเข้าช่วยซ่อมแซมและฟื้นฟูให้ผิวหน้าดูกระชับเรียบเนียน Ocean Skin Best of Ocean Best of Skin
เฮ้ย จบงี้ไม่ได้นะ ครับ ซื้อที่ไหนอะ
หาซื้อได้แล้วที่บูธวัสัน If and Boy King Power และร้านขายยาชั้นนำทั่วประเทศ
Ocean Skin Water
There are many
Essence
such ads, you can actually go online and search for them, or you can come to us and we can share them with you. But essentially this whole idea of being very, very comfortable with fast and impactful change, and which is why they go under the surgeon's knife, they're very happy with it, they change their identity, they change their genders, there is so much that they do with so much ease, and you can actually, of course this report was 300 slides, so I cannot show this to you, but essentially there was a lot. Just quickly, I'll take 3 more minutes to talk about a similar analysis that we did for India, So India is essentially, Indians are loud for sure, but let's not talk about that. But essentially Indians Indians in India, the whole concept of identity kind of for a long time has revolved around the idea of interdependence or kinship or family. I mean that's what people derive their identity from that. There was back in 80s there was a movie that got released, and then there was this song called Papa Kehte Hain Bada Naam Karega, which essentially means my dad wanted me to make it big. So essentially that became almost like a national anthem. And then there is this whole very, very common terminology. I don't know how many of you are interested in cricket, but there is a player called Rohit Sharma. So essentially, the son of Sharma is essentially a very popular thing which is used by most of the parents to actually convey to their kids that you can do better than the neighbor's son. So essentially, there was this. That's what Indian culture has remained for a very, very long time. And I will skip through this ad for the sake of time. But essentially, what this ad does is that it actually talks about how it goes and breaks gender stereotypes. So it essentially says boys can cry and girls can play with cars. I mean, so essentially, but there is a still fair bit of gender divide present in India.
Boys don't play with dogs.
But this has gone through an evolution as well. I mean, back in 1991, when actually India got economically open, and then the first time Suzuki came in and started actually making cars along with an Indian collaboration, and then a lot of other things happened, and essentially everyone started to talk about changes. And then India kind of moved from this whole idea of restraint to negotiation to now what we call as significance. What is this significance? Significance is essentially, in India, if you go and if you ask Gen Z what is the status, do you know what they will say? Status update is a status, essentially. So a status update, so a status is no more about what you own, how much do you have, okay, or whose kids you are. Status is actually about where you are, what you are doing, or what you are eating, who you are with. That's what status is all about. That's how they have changed status in India. So it essentially moved, the idea of progress moved, from a very, very set of defined criteria to a very, very loose idea, of what progress could be. The idea of resources moved to freedom. The idea of self-identity moved from a status show-off to essentially status update. And this is Gen Z for you. The local term for it is known as khalbali, which essentially means significance. So if essentially I'm not doing, or I'm not being with, or I'm not eating, or I'm not experiencing anything significant, then essentially I'm not satisfied. That's what India is all about. So a huge change happened from displaying success to essentially chasing significance. A lot of Gen Z behavior can actually just be defined and explained with this. I will quickly end this presentation with this nice hip-hop version of a song that came 1.5 years back. You can read through the translations and you can actually see what Gen Z is all about. And if you think Gen Z is the phenomenon, then remember there is Gen Alpha coming. Read through these quotes. This is where I will leave you. They are actually made by a set of 6 to 8 year old kids in a school in England. A journalist went to them from BBC and just quickly asked them who they are and what they want to do.
All right, thanks, Sanshil. That was really great. I think a lot of corporations, they seem to just want to focus on Gen Z, the younger generations. In your discussions with clients, do you find that, well, actually, there's some who realize that the older generations are bigger cohorts, more valuable, more spending power, and are you seeing, are you doing work in other generation cohorts as well, and are you discovering any other things within those areas?
There are clients who are interested in other generations as well. For example, recently we were actually contacted by one of the biggest spenders of market research to actually start looking at 60 years and above as a target market. What is interesting is that how 60 years and above are also being influenced by 15 years and below in the house. So that is where the importance lies, that is where the importance of a Gen Z or a Gen Alpha lies, There has been a long chatter, in terms of whether these are important, whether we need to look at them, I have this interesting story that I remember, which Rajiv, my colleague, shared, that there is something called as because bias, which essentially, so they showed that if you are cutting a queue and you just use the word because without actually sounding at all rational. So you say, hey, I want to go ahead because I'm wearing red jacket, they would still let you go ahead. It's called as because bias. So if you use the word because, they will let you go. I have the same hypothesis called as percentage bias, which essentially means, as a qualitative researcher, I believe there is this percentage bias, which essentially means if I just show you something has moved from 60% to 75%, you will say, wow. You will not bother about what has actually moved from 60% to 75%, But essentially, I think what is very important is to understand that there is something happening which is making a huge change, and we all see it all the day, so yeah. But there could be markets, there could be context and cultures in which other generations could play a role. Because, for example, Japan, I actually was, so the client came to us and said that they are interested in 75 to 90 years old in Japan, which actually, to be very frank, are terminated by design in the screeners, so So it's interesting, yes, generations are important, all generations are important, but I think Gen Z and Gen Alpha, just by the amount of influence, and the amount of power, they create inside homes, just by their knowledge is making them interesting.
In your Indian study, you touched about seeking significance, right? To what extent do you think it applies to the rest of the Asia or across the world?
So essentially we actually mapped people on different parameters, so for example, the rising sense of individuality versus the continuing sense of communality, within the people. So the markets which have slightly higher sense of individuality creeping in, for example, Thailand, for example, Vietnam, for example, India, are the markets where you will find the idea of significance really increasing and becoming more important, And then there would be markets like, for example, Indonesia, where the idea of communalism and the idea of being together and doing something, that is actually accepted by the societies is still very, very strong.
What is the most important factors affecting different kind of, or like what kind of parameter is the most significant in affecting difference between each of the market, like, for example, India versus Indonesia versus Thailand? Do you find any interesting finding, especially if you did any from Indonesia? Thank you.
Yes, we did. This particular study was done in 7 markets in Asia Pacific. So we did include Indonesia as well. I think what is very important, while I cannot go into each of the markets, but what is very important, or the crux of this whole cultural unconscious, is actually about bringing the differences from each market and not generalizing insights across the region or across the globe, because otherwise you will find I can tell you, there is more than enough data available if you want to know generally what Gen Z is doing. There is more than enough available. But it's just that when you go into that individual market, it becomes very, very interesting. You go into a cafe at between 5 to 7 in the evening in Indonesia, you will see friends gathering there every single evening for 2 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours, between 5 to 9, 5 to 10. They all meet up. They don't talk to each other for a single statement. They all are playing mobile phones, on the games, and they are interacting, but they are interacting on Discord. They are not interacting, So they are not talking to each other, That is where the difference comes in, That is how it is being expressed in each market, So for Indonesia, we found the whole idea of experience very, very big. So essentially, like what we said in Thailand, it was about significance. In Thailand, it was about influence. In India, it was about significance. In Indonesia, it was actually about cool experience. And cool experience in Indonesia, interestingly, does not come from outside. It actually comes from within Indonesia, from different islands, from different cities, So actually, a lot of within Indonesia local travel is essentially becoming very, very big for Gen Z.